This presentation will be on Iraq's food culture and influence. Geographical location. During ancient times, the lands of Iraq we know now were known as Mesopotamia. After World War I, Britain ended the Ottoman Empire, and in 1932, Iraq became an independent country. Iraq is one of the easternmost countries of the Arab world. It is bordered to the north by Turkey, to the east by Iran, to the west by Syria and Jordan, and to the south by Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Followed by Jordan, it is thus the Middle Eastern state with the least access to sea and offshore sovereignty. Some of Iraq's oil exports were used to buy food and medicine in an oil for food program. This was necessary as the soils in Iraq are poorly developed and are of a coarse texture, containing many stones and rock fragments. Plant growth is limited because of aridity and the humus content is low, thus so is the nutrient content. Also, salinity caused in part by over-irrigation is a serious problem that affects about two-thirds of the land. As a result, large areas of agricultural land had to be abandoned. All these factors contribute to the fresh food crisis in Iraq, thus imposing society to adapt their diets to suit the lack of crops due to the environmental burden. Influences on current food practices. The people of Iraq began to adapt their diet around the food that was being imported to the country. Fresh produce was limited to predominantly root vegetables that were able to be stored without refrigeration. Grains, legumes, and meat were also imported at a high supply, thus many of the popular current-day culinary dishes were formed around these food items that were more readily available. Lamb is a staple meat, but chicken, beef, goat, and fish are also eaten. Most dishes are served with rice, a yellowish, very aromatic long-grain rice that is grown in the provinces of Anbar. Bulgur wheat is used in many dishes, having been a staple in the country since the days of the ancient Assyrians, and flatbread is a staple that is served with a variety of dips, cheeses, olives, and jams at every meal. Current agricultural challenges in Iraq. Livestock is an important part of farming in Iraq. Traditionally, farmers keep livestock to enhance farms' incomes and satisfy their basic food requirements. Sheep, goats, and cattle are the most important livestock, supplying meat, wool, milk, and skins. The land appropriate for agriculture in Iraq is located in the upper northwest, and it is under 27% of the total area of the country. The poor performance of the agricultural sector due to environmental impediments and poor political influence drive migration to the urban areas in other countries, which overall increases the poverty rate. Iraq's agricultural sector embodies a small but vital component of Iraq's economy. However, rapid population growth combined with the need to produce more food for a limited resource of land have resulted in farming systems that tend to maximize short-term return at the expense of long-term sustainability. Overgrazing is a significant problem in Iraq. There is little effort contributed to increase livestock production while maintaining range resources. Therefore, it is likely that the animals' feeding requirements will outweigh the food available. The recent intensification of violence in Iraq has stopped many farmers from venturing to their fields, hence will cause further food security implications. The major constraints include restricted access to land due to violence, internal population displacement, reduced availability and increased cost of farming inputs, the disruption of markets, increased cost and reduced access to animal feed sources, and reduced veterinary supplies and services. Imports and exports in Iraq. The major exports are crude oil, which are 84% of the exports, crude materials excluding fuels, which take up 8%, and food and live animals, which are 5%. Imports include food, which are grains, meat, fresh produce, and medicine. Consumption of key commodities in Iraq. So the basic commodities are wheat, rice, oil, and pulses. In 2006, the global food price index rose by 10% and by a further 41.3% in 2007. This resulted in extreme poverty, and therefore people had to resort to cheaper alternatives, which were white meat, pulses, and vegetables. The negative impact of food deprivation in Iraq. So the negative impact of food deprivation is significant. Malnutrition, especially in children, increases in the frequency and severity of infectious diseases, which affect intellectual and physical development and increases mortality. A staggering 8.5% of Iraqi children under 5 are underweight. 1 in 4 Iraqi children experience stunted physical and intellectual growth due to chronic undernutrition. 1.9 million Iraqis or 5.7% of the population, are food deprived, consuming less than the average dietary requirements of 2,161 kilojoules per day. A further 4 million Iraqis, or 14% of the population, are vulnerable to food insecurity. Australian consumption of key commodities. In Australia, people are more financially stable. Under 5% of the population are undernourished, and demand does not outweigh the supply of food, unlike Iraq. Prime exports are beef and wheat. Migration to Australia. The Gulf War in 1991 led a large number of people to flee Iraq and migrate to Australia. Iraqi immigration to Australia peaked between 1992 and 1995, which led to an amount of 48,170 Iraqi-born Australians. Cultural influences. Fast food is the major influence from Iraq. Australia is influenced by Iraqi and Arab cuisine significantly. In 2001, there was a major rise in Middle Eastern food specialty stores and restaurants, and now these days we see them everywhere. The references used in this presentation are listed in this slide.